did you want to start things off, Sam? And then if you can watch for hands raised and questions in the chat and all that kind of stuff, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, you bet. The plague has found its way to my house, but happy that Dale's here to do most of the presenting for us today. We just really appreciate all of you staff, being here, being available to learn about fiscal impact statements and providing our feedback to the legislative fiscal analyst office. It's maybe not the most exciting thing you've ever done, but it is important. We're really appreciative of you all. And yeah, I know some of you have been around for a while and have could probably do some of this in your sleep, but there are a little bit of changes this year as far as Representative Pulsifer would like us to try and note any reporting requirements that are inherent in the bill in our fiscal note responses and things like that. So we'll get into some of that. And if you're brand new, then welcome. And we're excited to have you. So I'll turn it over to Dale.
All right, thank you, Sam. And also, Sam, if you can just monitor and make sure there aren't others waiting in the waiting room. I've been admitting folks, but there'll probably be a few others coming in. Okay, for those that don't know me, my name is Dale Frost. I'm the Minimum School Program Administrator. I also function as the Fiscal Policy Analyst for the board. I don't know what you're talking about, Sam. Fiscal notes are exciting. And I'm not super exciting, but they are important, and we very much need all of your help to get this process to successfully accomplish what's required of us, and to provide the legislature with what they need so that they can appropriate the funds necessary to do what they ask, essentially. So my first question for the group, and I'd like this to be a little more interactive. So, if you have an answer to one of my questions, please raise your hand. And Sam, you can call on those people. So my first question for the group is, what is a fiscal note? How would you define a fiscal note? So I'm looking for hands.
We can just pick on people that we know too,
That's true. Go ahead and pick on people if people are not chatty enough here.
I volunteer. Right. I cannot raise my hand, but I will volunteer. This is Rita Brock.
Thank you, Rita.
I think a fiscal note is a mean or a way to show the legislator the need for some funding.
Okay, that's very close. Scott, I think you have your hand raised. That's part of the way there, Rita. Did you have yours? Oh, go ahead.
If there's policy or legislation that's passed that needs to be supported by funding, a note is attached, a fiscal note detailing where it's coming from and where it's going to be spent, how long it's going to be there. I think that's what a fiscal note is.
So good. Thank you. So both of you have pieces to that answer. So, there's this broader budget process, and then the fiscal note is maybe a subset of that process, the fiscal note process. So if there's just a general request for funding, that would go through a budget request and through the appropriations committee. But if there are impacts to legislation that's introduced that requires funding for an agency, or in our case also LEAs to comply with those new regulations or requirements, that's where the fiscal note process comes in. And so yeah, The one difference, Rita, from like a general request would be that it's tied directly to a piece of legislation and to the direct impacts of that legislation. Hope that helps. So my next question for the group, let's see. Oh, well, first off, who owns the fiscal note? This is an important distinction. So the Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst owns the fiscal note. There's another term that you'll hear, fiscal impact statement. What's the difference between a fiscal impact statement and a fiscal note? Sam, you can pick on anybody you want, unless somebody raises their hand. Anybody willing to try to take a stab at that one?
This is kind of a tough one, so I'm going to throw it over to Christine Elegante if she wants to
Oh, all right.
take a stab.
Yeah, I have no idea.
That's okay.
Okay, so Christine, I'll give you a clue. The fiscal
Okay.
impact statement is owned by USBE, and the fiscal note is owned by the Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst. Is that helpful at all?
Maybe. So you're asking, you want to know what the fiscal impact statement is.
And how does it differ from a fiscal note?
Okay, so my guess is if it's owned by USBE, then it gives the detail of what the money's being used for, how it's being used, and how it impacts the agency as a whole. I don't know.
That's close.
Good
Yeah,
guess.
that is a good guess. So thanks for being a good sport.
Anytime.
We'll keep selecting people to answer. No, that's very close. So USBE owns what's called the fiscal impact statement. Where it gets confusing is everybody, including myself, will sometimes use the term fiscal impact statement and fiscal note interchangeably. I'm going to try to make sure my language is a little clearer. But a fiscal impact statement comes from the agencies, plural. You could have multiple agencies that each offer their fiscal impact statements, and those all go into a single fiscal note owned by LFA. Let's assume that we're really the only, it's an education bill. Our response will be helping to drive the fiscal note, and there's not other agencies. We could have a response from our own interpretation, but that does not mean that will automatically go into the fiscal note. There are times, for various reasons, sometimes we agree with it, sometimes we don't, that what we say a bill will cost will not make it into the fiscal note. And I think this is an important distinction because lots of USBE staff over the years, as I've worked with them, have expressed frustration on why are we even going through this process if LFA is just going to ignore us. Sometimes that will happen. I will say that. But the better we do our job, the more credibility we have with LFA, the greater the likelihood that our costs, as we identify them, will make it into the final fiscal note. So just wanted you to understand that we could control our fiscal impact statement, but we can't, at the end of the day, control what goes into the fiscal note. So here's a couple answers to what is a fiscal note in a little more detail. It's an estimate of the direct measurable impacts that result from implementing legislation. The fiscal note is to help legislators understand how a bill will affect the state budget overall, USBE, individual programs, or LEAs. These can be program costs or savings, revenue gains or losses. So where do we find these? If you go to the legislature's main website, le.utah.gov, and you click on bills, you'll have a drop-down menu and you have to select a specific session. And then once you get into a session, you'll have a list of House bills and Senate bills. Once you go into a specific bill, you'll see on the right-hand side related documents. The first document that comes up once the fiscal note gets published is the fiscal note. And it is really an important companion piece to any piece of legislation. So we'll go into more of the structure of fiscal notes and how we provide our fiscal impact statements that inform fiscal notes in a second. But if there's one thing you all as staff, if I can make this point, is that we have a very quick turnaround during session to provide our fiscal impact statement. So during session, once a bill gets introduced, there's a 4-day turnaround. And so LFA has to have a fiscal note published within 4 days. That first day is the time that we have to provide our fiscal impact statement to LFA. The second day, the analyst has time to respond. They often come back to us with questions. Then it goes to the LFA director and finally the bill sponsor. Through any of those future steps, we could get follow-up questions and have to respond. But when we reach out to you and really need you to drop everything and provide us data, it's not because we are, full of ourselves or anything like that. We just need answers really quickly because we only have a set amount of time. Outside of session, we have more time than 24 hours. So right now, if you've been involved with fiscal notes, we've kind of done that over a series of a couple of weeks, quite often. And then even during session at the very last week, that 4-hour period turns into a 24-hour period. And so we only have hours, not a day, to respond to bills. Luckily, in the last week, usually it's very rare to have new bills introduced. It does happen. They're usually substitutes to an existing bill, but especially during that last week, we might need an even faster turnaround. So again, if you hear from us and we need data from you and we need it quickly, it's because of this. So feel free, everybody, to raise your hand, ask questions and comments throughout. Sam will be watching for those. You can put things into the chat if you want. And then we'll also have time at the end for questions. As Sam mentioned, we're adding something new at the request of Representative Pulsifer. And, it's kind of in line with the overall work of the Reports and Requirements Task Force, which is we're going to be including with each of our fiscal impact statements a statement on the effect to USBE and or LEA reporting requirements. So if there's a bill that adds reporting requirements from LEAs to USBE, we need to note that. If it takes reporting requirements away, if it adds data points that weren't there, that had to be reported in an existing report. Those are the kind of things that Representative Pulsifer and board members want to see so that they get a general sense of the increase or decrease to reporting requirements from legislation. I think legislators often don't realize the extent to which they're adding administrative burden and reporting in their bills. So it'll be a good exercise. So that'll be another question from our editors to you, in addition to the direct measurable impacts in terms of costs, also in terms of reporting requirements. Okay, so here's the general process that our editors will follow and we'll need you to help with. So once the bill's introduced, we'll share that bill. We'll need you to read through the bill and identify what's being changed in the legislation. Okay, from those changes, what are the new or revised requirements? And then what are the costs or savings to each of these new requirements, both to LEAs and to USBE? And then the actual writing of the fiscal impact statements, you all will not need to do, but we'll certainly be getting your input on as we draft those. So how do you read a bill? Let's talk about some of the basic mechanics of reading through legislation. Most of you have done that. There are highlighted provisions, there's existing language, new language, and stricken language. the highlighted provisions and the description at the beginning of a bill are helpful, but should you write a fiscal note just based on the highlighted provisions? No, please do not. Sometimes the highlighted provisions are wrong. Sometimes they don't go into enough detail. We need to actually write the fiscal note based on the text as it's written in the bill. So you'll see language that has no underlines or strike throughs. That's existing statute. You'll see language that's underlined. That usually means that this is language that's being added to statute. Language that has a strike through it is existing language that's being removed from statute. So in general, as you're trying to determine new or revised requirements, and there are always exceptions to this, and understanding the existing language is important, but looking at what's being added or removed from statute will help you to determine those new or revised requirements. When we get into then estimating the cost or savings of that, I want to reiterate that credibility with LFA is super, super important. And I worked for years on this, and I know that others within USBE financial operations, namely Scott and Deborah and Sam, work very, very hard to maintain that credibility. And there will be times where we push back on you on certain things, and it's not, it's with credibility in mind. We're trying to figure out, A, what is LFA looking for, and how can we make the best case about these costs? So how do we create a credible, defendable estimate? Well, the first thing to know is that we try to use a unit cost approach whenever possible. So what does that mean? Well, a unit cost approach is to identify each unit of impact, explain the impact to each unit, and determine the range of impact. Let me go through an example. What's a unit of impact? Well, a bill could impact students. It could impact teachers, schools, school buses, LEAs, or USBE. If you have a bill that impacts each individual school, if you just talk about the impacts at the LEA level and kind of wash over the fact that an LEA could have one school or up to 80 or 90 schools in the case of our largest district, you are not accurately representing the impact. So we try to get down to the smallest units of impact and then build up from there to give an estimate or range on the local front. USBE on its own is a unit of impact and will often have multiple impacts within USBE. So what could these be? These could be, a direct cost increase in terms of LEAs or USBE needing to add staff, or even add time and effort and not add staff. Sometimes we get pushback or questions from staff that says, we don't need to hire anybody. Do we need to say anything about the impact? Even if that's true, USBE will want to know how many hours of time it will take to accomplish a certain task. And then we can say that we can, if it requires a new report that might take up to 20 hours of somebody's time, we can say that. We won't need to hire additional staff and can, absorb that within existing budget and processes, but they'll want to know those specifics. Same thing on the LEA front. Capital expenditures or the acquisition of equipment or supplies are examples of other impacts. So in general, we're asking the editors and you also to, as you're going through and identifying these new or revised requirements, ask yourself, maybe make a grid like this. Okay, is the category of the impact, is this the local impact, meaning is this an impact on LEAs, or is this the impact to the state? If it's a local impact, what is the unit? Schools, students? Try to break that down into as many lines as you need to. What are the costs or savings of that impact? And then also the time frame. Is this a one-time or a continuous cost? If an LEA has to hire new staff and have that staff around every year, that's a continuous cost. It's an ongoing cost. If it's, having to do a one-time update to systems, that would be a one-time cost, regardless of whether it takes, a single year to do that. Same thing on USB, there might be some, a greater upfront cost of time and effort, and that would be a one-time cost, but there might be ongoing costs. It might take, a full FTE for the first year to implement the beginning of a program, and then only a quarter FTE after that. So there are ways for us to account for that in the budget and to estimate those things. So hopefully it gives you an idea of what the unit cost approach looks like. That is an important and goes a long way to building credibility with LFA if we do this well. So then after using the unit cost approach, we really want you to cite credible sources. You are our top source, as in from our standpoint in financial operations, we are not content experts, and we rely on you to get to that information. So we have primary contacts by department, and so we'll be reaching out to those folks, and in turn they will be connecting us to many of you, and we'll be asking you questions about these different requirements and getting your take on what you think would be the impact. So other than staff, we really want you to point to outside credible sources when possible. And so LFA knows that we're not just taking a number out of thin air, if possible. In addition, if we have to add staff, the fiscal note editors know that we have a list of all the position types within USBE and the median total cost for those position types. By nature of it being the median, some folks within these positions will be earning less than that, some will be earning more, but we have to request the median. Sometimes we get folks within our agency who want to upgrade the position type or ask for the top of a range or those sort of things, and we can't do that. Following the process of requesting the median cost goes a long way to building credibility with LFA. And then I think, Nora Lee, are you able to provide this document to everybody in the chat?
It is in the chat, Dale.
Okay, so that's already in the chat. So one of the questions that our editors will be asking is, does this require new staffing? And if so, what is the position type? And then we need to have a justification. We can't just say 1 FTE or 2 FTE without any kind of logic or explanation. If it really only takes a couple hundred hours of somebody's time, we can't ask for a full FTE, which is over 2,000 hours of full-time capacity. So we kind of have to manage that carefully and ask for what we really think it takes to implement a bill. All right, along those lines, we need to use clearly defined, reasonable assumptions and as many details as practical. What does that look like? And this is a hard question to answer because it really depends on the context of the bill and the situation. Let me give you kind of an extreme example that we dealt with early earlier this year in the last month or so. This is a Wilcox bill. It's file 1082. This is a bill that creates a whole new system to both track and to stop school safety incidents. The biggest cost factor to this is to require somebody armed on every school. So in general, when we're looking at a bill, the higher the cost, possibly the higher the profile of the bill, or the more that a legislator is likely to push back on our estimates, the more we're going to be pushing for really sound logic and defendable estimates, something that we could accurately explain to LFA, and then if they need to change assumptions, that they can do so. So this is just an example where we had to break it down quite a bit on the LEA cost front. So in this case, this is a bill that requires either a school guardian or a school resource officer or an armed security guard. And the school guardian could be an existing FTE, but it can't be a principal, it can't be a teacher. And so, for us, we have, one of the hard questions for us that we could not answer in any way, we couldn't figure out any like reasonable way to be able to estimate something. So we just had to come up with a percentage and be transparent on it. We decided, okay, of all the schools, they, some schools already have SROs, some already have armed security guards, but and some will have existing FTE who will be willing to do this. So we assumed, okay, 50% of schools have to add new FTE to do that. The majority would probably choose school guardians because they can do other, other jobs or provide other services most of the time. And so we broke it out. Of the 50%, 30% would add a new school guardian as an FTE and so on. And then came up with a methodology to explain the new costs for each one of those. So in the case, especially where it's something nebulous like this, trying to be really clear about our assumptions. And so then LFA internally can have their conversations. They could also have that conversation with the legislators to kind of figure out what they think is reasonable. Here's another example. So it requires every LEA to have an LEA safety director. We went through the list of the districts, and it was about 10% of all LEAs were large enough. We thought that they would probably need to have a new FTE to require, to do everything required in the bill. For the smaller, for almost all the charters, and for the smaller districts, so that's the other 90%. We assumed, I think it was 0.2 FTE per district. Per LEA, excuse me. So that was kind of our logic there. There were requirements of various types of training for new guardians, and so that we had to go through that process to estimate those costs. Some were ongoing, some were one time. They also had there's a requirement that every school have a biometric safe for a firearm, as well as this panorama software and a panic button for every school and every classroom. And so, you can see in this case, we're going through and we're providing data on all of the units in question, but then a percentage of that, and then providing, defendable methodology to the extent possible on where we got our cost data. So, this is more in depth than 95% of the bills that will be out there. But, it hopefully can give you an idea of what needs to happen, especially for higher profile, higher cost bills, or bills we're expecting pushback on. But, we can do a much simpler methodology for this, but for most bills, but it still follows kind of a similar kind of procedure. So hopefully it gives you kind of a picture of what the unit cost approach could look like. So speaking of details here, our fiscal impact statement for this bill was 7 pages long. Again, this is kind of an extreme case, but one to show you that, often we'll need to provide this kind of data to, and then we also had 4 attachments for this bill. So that's kind of what we mean about as many details as practical. Now, this is before session. We had more time to do this. With 24 hours, we wouldn't have had that amount of time. So that's why it's always nice when legislators give us, a heads up about a bill, and if they either, working through Angie's team to show us before it gets introduced, or introducing it as a bill file before it gets introduced as an actual bill. The last point I want to make is that we need to maintain objectivity in writing. And this may be the hardest part of the fiscal note process. Often, when there's a bill that we like, we want to reduce the costs or minimize the cost. There's a bill we really don't like. The temptation is to increase the cost. but we need to avoid either case, either side of that, and really try to separate ourselves from our feelings of a bill and just say, if we had to implement, if LEAs had to implement the bill as written, what would it take? And the more we can maintain objectivity in our writing and in our assumptions, that goes to build credibility. So how do we actually write a fiscal impact statement? The good news for you all is that most of you will not have to do that. This is a list of the fiscal note editors for this session. These are all folks from our school finance division. Brett Baker, who's my analyst, and I will be writing a few of them, but for the most part, we're supporting these folks as they write the initial drafts of fiscal notes. So they will be the ones reaching out to you, writing. I will go kind of over the writing process at a very, very high level though. So these are the different sections of the fiscal note as shown in the fiscal note system provided by LFA. The two main sections that we focus on are the local government impacts. So this will be impacts to LEAs, and the State Board of Impacts, so the impacts to USBE. If there's an impact to another agency, as there often is, we usually defer to those agencies and their partners. Again, we want to go through this unit cost approach for both the local side and the state side. I want to make a point here that USBE costs are treated somewhat differently than LEA costs. If there's a USBE cost that LFA agrees with that's above $10,000, then for that bill to pass, according to the legislature's rules, assuming they follow their rules, that those costs have to be funded in the final budget or that appropriation added to the bill for that bill to pass. Local government impacts, the thought process often is, well, we provide the field $5 billion, they can handle it. And so those are not directly tied into the process, but there are many legislators who are very concerned about adding, cost impacts, especially administrative burdens onto LEAs. And so that will make it into the fiscal note and will certainly impact the conversation. So the last part on the fiscal note is, and you can help us with this, there are lines throughout each bill version, and LFA wants to know, okay, you're saying there's X impact on LEAs or Y impact to USBE, exactly what lines are driving those impacts. So when you respond in email, it's very helpful for us. You could even do it in a spreadsheet or just line it out saying lines 100 through 120 require LEAs to do X, Y, and Z, and that we'll note those right here in the fiscal impact statement in this part of the system. So a couple of do's and don'ts on the fiscal note front, and I've already kind of covered most of these things. Again, please be objective, accurate, and try to stay relevant as possible. We need to know whether costs are one-time or ongoing in nature and the timeline. Sometimes it will, it could be a one-time cost that's spread over 3 years, those kind of things, and provide documentation. Please do not include secondary or indirect impacts. What do I mean by that? There will be times where a bill says, LEAs may do X, Y, and Z. If they don't have to do something and they choose to do it and it costs them something, that's up to their discretion, and that won't make it into the final bill. That's an indirect impact. Or a secondary impact could be that, LEAs have to do something, which then could cause them to want to do something else or to do something else. Those kind of secondary or second or third or fourth level effects are not included. Same thing with dynamic changes. You could, if you kind of try to game theory something out, you can go crazy trying to figure out, all of those potential impacts. And what will make it into the final LFA fiscal note will just be the primary direct impact. Please don't editorialize in the bill. You can hate a bill, love a bill, all you want, and you can, talk to us about that, but what actually makes it into the writing, we need to stay objective. And please try not to change your numbers to affect the passage of a bill. And so if it's a bill that's an agency bill and we really want it to happen and there's still a cost, we need to show that. And vice versa. If it's a bill that we really don't want to see passed, we don't want to inflate numbers to try to affect the passage of that bill. So, in general, I would say that our staff are really, really good on this. And then the few times where, we have a disagreement, it goes back to kind of the between FinOps and USBE staff. It's us trying to do our best to maintain credibility with LFA, it's definitely not personal. If we don't see eye to eye on something, we'll try to work with you on that. Hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of the overall fiscal note process. I was going to go through an example so you can kind of see what this would look like with a simple bill from last year, and then would love to open it up to the field for those who have worked on fiscal notes in the past, things that made it easier or things that you learned through this process. So let me kind of go through this example first. So House Bill 124 from last session, right here. This is a bill that added speech language pathologists and audiologists to the teacher salary supplement program. And so, when we got this bill, we reached out to program staff, and wanted to ask, talking about LEA impacts, are LEAs going to have to collect or, report any new data or do any new processes? And the answer is that these folks are already in Cactus, or we already have the data on them, and that there will likely be no significant LEA impacts or reporting requirements. So then it's really just what would be the programmatic cost for this. And so Kristen Campbell in Teaching and Learning ran the numbers and determined that there would be likely 885 FTE who could qualify under this program. So then, okay, so 885 new FTE. How much are the awards? Well, the awards. This is the COBE, which is LFA's Compendium of Budget Information. We can always provide you links or show you how to access this for any program in the state budget. So for TSSP, it's a $4,100 salary adjustment. And then in legislation, it says that the legislature will appropriate funding to cover the employer paid benefit costs of retirement, workers' comp, Social Security, and Medicare. Because if they didn't do that, that would come out of the 4,100, and the teacher wouldn't see 4,100, they'd probably see 3,500 or something like that. So that's a 30.63% cost increase above the 4,100. So the actual cost, the calculation here is really simple. It's the 4,100 times 130.63%. So each new award would cost $53.55. Multiplying that by 885, we got $4.7 million. And that's what we put in our fiscal impact statement. And just as as you can see here, the LFA essentially took our number and moved forward with it. Just as I wanted to show you this as an example of, it does matter when we have that credibility that, that often our numbers can make it into the final bill. This is a bill that didn't pass, but if it had passed, it'd be important that we got that $4.7 million just so that the program can fund the awards for anybody who qualifies. And so hopefully that kind of gives you a general view of the fiscal note process from the introduction of a bill to the fiscal note. Again, credibility is key with LFA, and we do our best to maintain that, and we'll have conversations with you on that. Often editors will have to come back to us and we can talk about it on how to respond and in a way that can both meet our needs as an agency to implement or meet LEA's needs, as well as maintaining that credibility. I wanted to reiterate that this year we're adding a new statement for every bill on whether or not it will increase or change reporting requirements to USBE or LEA. And so that will be a question that our editors will be asking. And then lastly, as I said before, once session starts, we only have a 24-hour turnaround. So when we reach out to you, we'll try to have our ducks in a row to the extent possible. We try to assign these to editors as quickly as possible, tell them who we think the staffers are, and some possible initial questions to answer so we can get the ball rolling. But we need to get responses back and get these things vetted and out pretty quickly to meet that 24-hour timeline. So that's basically what I have. So I included here, these are the contacts. This is Sam, Brett, and I. Please reach out to us if you have questions on a fiscal note. If there's been a bill that's in your arena that we haven't reached out to you, we try to capture all of the bills, but there may be some that slip through the cracks. Please reach out to us and we'll make sure we get a fiscal impact statement drafted and out. And again, we just really appreciate all your time and expertise as we go through this sometimes crazy process. So I'd like to open it up to the field, or to you all. Kind of what's been your experience with fiscal notes? Anything that you've learned as you've kind of gone through this process? Dan, feel free to select anybody, any unlucky volunteer there. Or not really a volunteer.
Hey, Dale, I was going to bring up, I mean, the biggest problem with fiscal notes is a lack of clarity in the bill. And that's, I mean, particularly like they'll go one place they'll mention teachers and another place they'll mention educators. And that's a huge difference when we're trying to come up with a fiscal note or amount.
So sometimes, as you know, with bills, especially additional drafts of the bill, the language isn't very tight or very clear. So there are kind of two pieces to that. If there are, policy concerns or drafting concerns, we'll have you work with Angie and her team so that they can maybe get those things tightened up in language. But then, yeah, we would have to make an assumption to say, it says this in this place, it says this in that place. USBE assumed the sponsor meant this, and we ran the numbers in this way. So that kind of goes back to the methodology. Sometimes we have to make our best guess, and sometimes the numbers are very different depending on how you interpret. Another case, here's an example, just this last fall, there was a bill that required USBE to market some program to parents, and to staff, and we were trying to figure out, I think it was mostly to the field and staff, what did they mean by market or a marketing plan, or I forget exactly what was in statute, because it could be something as simple as adding, a few slides to a training, not a big deal, or, if we had to hire a marketing firm, that's a much bigger deal. And so I reached out to the LFA analyst, who then connected me to the actual drafter, and they got back to me on legislative intent from the legislature. Oh, they meant this, this, and this. And then it made it much easier for us to actually write the fiscal note. And so, yeah, if there are it doesn't have to be one-way communication. We can have those questions, try to get them answered to the best of our ability, and then provide, a good fiscal impact statement. But yeah, the opaqueness of legislation is always a challenge. Other thoughts?
Hey, Dale, just kind of along
Yeah.
with that question,
And I can't see you, so if you could say your name, that would be helpful.
Okay, this is Jared Lisenby.
Okay,
So if there
thanks.
is a situation where, there's opaqueness in the bill, and so we're, basically we've done our research, but it's like, okay, we don't know, say it's a report, we don't know exactly how much time, should we estimate higher a bit to just give a little bit of a flexibility there, or lower? What's the best thought if we do have to make a rough guess about the financial impact on something the legislation is asking?
Yeah, it's hard to have like a hard and fast rule on that, Jared. There are times, I mean, like for example, with the case of that school safety bill, there are times where we'll provide 2 or 3 different scenarios saying, if USBE has to do this, then it would take this long. If USBE has to do this, then this would be the impact. I kind of looking through the tea leaves assumed that the sponsor would take the lowest cost option that we provide. So in this case, I wasn't going to give a range of options. If it's a sponsor who I thought would be a little bit more open to our feedback, then I provide maybe a greater range. If in general, if you have to err and it's a USBE admin impact, I'll err on the side of more cost, not less. It would be better to have a balance in a program than us not having the time or ability to actually implement a program. With that said, if there's a program that adds a few requirements and we come back and say we need 3 FTE, we could easily be laughed out of the room and they just ignore us and say no cost to the fiscal note. And so it's a delicate balance. I don't know if that's an answer, Jared, but that's kind of what we deal with in this process.
And
Tanya.
Yeah, go ahead, Tanya. I guess I would just say we really
And feel
appreciate
free
you giving
to disagree, Sam.
No, I think generally the onus will be on us in financial ops to make those final decisions. So we really appreciate you just giving us everything that you have on your side, if that makes sense at all. But we can kind of do those final follow-ups with the sponsor and things like that, unless you have some connections or you've had discussions with the sponsor. I think a lot of times we'll be able to kind of make those final determinations, which we'll share with you. We're not going to just, well, this is what we're going to do, and Jared will never know.
Right. And if it gets tricky, we'll try to schedule a very quick virtual call and talk it through, and there are times where the editors will write something up and Sam and I will review it, and we'll grill the editors and they'll be like, oh, we should have asked this, or maybe we should have thought about that, and they'll go back to you. And that's why it's definitely not a one-way process. There's a lot of back and forth as we figure out where to land. I think we had Tanya and Benji. Is that right?
Yeah, I just think that it would be helpful to clarify for staff something that I learned the first time I was in a session and got a fiscal bill or fiscal note, that the 24 hours does not stop for weekends. It's not business hours. It actually is 24 hours. So that means staff might have to work on the weekend for fiscal notes. And I think that's super helpful for everyone to be clear about.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. It gets tricky because so in general, they don't count Saturdays, but they do count holidays. And that's where it gets really tricky. So if we get something on a Friday afternoon, the actual fiscal note counter will often say, oh, we have 72 hours or 71 hours. But if the next you know, if it's a 3-day weekend, then we'll have to work during that Monday. In general, during those times, we'll try to tell the editors, please reach out to your contact today on that. And yeah, there have been times where there have been miscommunications and somebody didn't even hear about it until we were after the 24 hours. We try our best, but when they're flying at us, sometimes it's hard to juggle all of that. You're very right that we should assume 24 hours and it's not business hours, that it's the next day unless we hear otherwise. Yeah. Benji, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, which kind of goes right along with that, Tanya. So thanks for setting me up. So where that is the case, you know, I know me and my team are often, not often, but we will be on site in like JJYS facilities, reviewing programs, and we don't have access to our computers at all those times. So how are we notified when you need? Is it strictly through email? Does a phone call, a text? I mean, what's the communication process?
So on that, I showed you a screenshot of our contact information. Great question, Benji. So in general, what I've asked our editors to do is to first send out an email, share the bill, their questions, and then if you're going to be out of office, please have your out of office replies on there. That's very helpful. So we asked for cell phone numbers for the top contacts within each department. But if we do need to contact somebody, yeah, definitely we'd like to follow up with a text and have a phone call, and try, you know, in general, we want to connect with program staff within, you know, a matter of a few hours. And we understand that you guys have normal jobs and you have programs to run and LEAs to visit. And so what I've told editors to do is to reach out in multiple different ways. Usually staffers are pretty good at responding pretty quickly. If I don't hear back from program staff within an hour or two, then I usually try to follow up with a Teams message and then a text and then a phone call. Does that help, Benji?
Yes, thank you.
So that's what we're doing. If there's a specific staffer who's not like one of your top you know, people on that list, because it's, you know, we need the content expertise of somebody, it's very helpful if you give us their phone number so we can text them and try to get a hold of them, or you text them and have them call us or email us. However it works, it kind of depends on different departments. But yeah, I do find that we need to use multiple methods to contact. I really tried to drive home the point that you can't just send an email and wait 8 hours and then say, hey, they never got back to us. That's not good enough. We'll try to reach out to you in multiple ways. Sam, any thoughts that you have to add to this? I don't know if Brett's on. I'd love to hear Brett's thoughts too.
Yeah, I'm on. I'm kind of losing my voice though. But yeah, just on what Benji was saying, we do try to reach out, like Dale said, multiple different ways. And we usually try to give you at least a little bit of time to respond so that we're not just hounding you. But also sometimes we might reach out to your superior in some way if we're just really in a hurry on something. But it's nothing personal. We're not trying to get you in trouble or anything. We're just really on crunch time.
One thing that's helpful is if you have LEA contacts that you can gather some information from, as long as the bill is not protected. So, you know, open up the attachment with the bill language, and if it doesn't say protected on top, you can share that with LEA folks. If it does, unfortunately, we need to keep it within our agency. And yeah, I have contacts with VAs that I reach out to all the time, trying to get quick feedback on different bills. So yeah, there are multiple ways that we try to get LEA feedback. It's challenging though, given the time frame. Sam, any final words of wisdom there?
I would just say don't let it scare you. Reach out, have a quick phone call with us. We can build a spreadsheet template or whatever you need from us. Don't worry about math skills or spreadsheet skills or anything like that. Just we need your program expertise and your specific section of expertise. So we really appreciate that. Looks like Audra, yeah, right on the very top, it'll have in bold letters protected if the bill is protected, but otherwise should be good to share.
We'll also try to point it out to our editors to make sure that it's clear to them that this is a protected bill. We need to keep it within the agency. Yeah. Well, that's all that we have. Again, we appreciate all of your help, and yeah, it is a little bit overwhelming at first, but pretty quickly you'll get used to the process. And I'll give you kind of my take. I worked in multiple states. Every state has some sort of process to try to estimate impacts of legislation, but most states, or at least many states, don't have a formal mechanism to actually pay for them. So I'm grateful that this state does, to at least on the agency side, and hopefully for LEAs to try to at least minimize those impacts without or minimize unfunded mandates. So thanks for your help, and it'll be a fun session.